But before we get started with that, I thought I would just present myself a little first. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. There are many things that this weird spring with the coronavirus has made a lot more difficult. One of the things that it has made easier is that for me, who live in Seattle, to give a lecture at a New York State Library. That is very wonderful that is actually possible. So thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the interest. Thank you for being here on a Tuesday night talking about Denmark, talking about Hygge. So I'm from Denmark. I lived in Denmark until 2016. I've been in the United States in Seattle for about 4 years. What you have on your map now is, on your screen is a map of Denmark. It's with an A in Danish. And right there, just above Aarhus, in the western part of Denmark called Jutland, the only part of Denmark that is not an island. Right there where that big red dot is a little town called Auning. And that is where I grew up. It's a little town of about 2,000 people. No high school there, so I had to go to Randers, just left of it to go to high school. And then later I attended universities in Aalborg, if you go a little further north. And then I transferred to Aarhus University, which is a little south of the big red dot there. I studied Nordic languages and literature. And after I was done, I taught first at a normal gymnasium, as we call high schools in Denmark. And then later I switched to a different type of school that you don't have here in the US. And directly translated, it's called a folk high school. It's a school for students the age of 19 to 25 mostly, but it's open to everybody. It is a school with no exams, no grades. It's a boarding school, so both students and teachers live there at the school. And much of the teaching also happens outside of the classroom because everybody is part of the community there. And it is a school that many Danish young people attend after they're done in high school, getting ready for their time at a university. It's about 6 months, and as I mentioned, no grades and no exams. And from there, I got a job at the University of Washington in Seattle, at the Department of Scandinavian Studies. So that is where I teach now, and I am teaching, among many other things, Hygge. I teach some of the language, the second-year language classes, and different culture, literature, cinema classes about Denmark and Scandinavia. But today, what you've all signed up to hear about is that Hygge, right? The big woolly socks, the warm beverages and cups, just like mine right here. So, tonight I will be talking about Hygge, the elusive Danish concept of comfort, coziness, and candles. I will be focusing first on how the English-speaking world has appropriated Hygge, maybe even how the understanding of Hygge here in America can seem a bit off to a Danish person. And after that, I will talk about what I believe the core of Hygge to be. So that will be the good sides. Okay, so Hygge was not a concept that I had spent any time thinking about or analyzing before 2014. Hygge was just there sometimes. It was ingrained in Danish culture. You use the word Hygge when you were leaving a group of friends or a family get-together. You would say, "Det var hyggeligt." That was cozy, that was hyggelig, acknowledging that you had had a nice time. Or when you invite friends over and you spend a little time setting the mood, decorating so that the people would feel welcome, relaxed, and at ease. You were then making it hyggelig. Common definitions of hygge can be bought as posters now, just like the one you see here on the slide. The practice of creating cozy and congenial environment that promote emotional well-being. Variations of this definition is found in all the books and articles on hygge, along with more or less successful attempts of phonetically spelling out hygge. All the articles start with that, like, how do you say it? How do you pronounce? I moved to Seattle in the summer of 2016, right when the hygge craze was taken off. And I was, quite frankly, a little overwhelmed. In 2016, hygge was even shortlisted as Oxford Dictionary Word of the Year, together with two other words that were big in 2016. And I'm going to give you a second to ponder. What might those be? Words that were shortlisted for Word of the Year in 2016. Well, it was Brexit and it was post-truth. Two words that still seem to be prevalent to this day. So now you have a slide in front of you that shows you some of the front covers of the many books that have come out about hygge over the last 5 years. Many of them written directly in English. They're not written in Danish and then translated. They are written for an English-speaking audience. They all seem to have one line of reasoning in common. For a handful of years, Denmark came out on the very top of the World Happiness Index. Scholars and journalists and self-help book authors, they were all interested in finding this secret ingredient to Danish happiness. Why were the Danes happier than the Swedes, say? The Swedes are healthier on average. They have longer life expectancy. But still, we Danes were happier than the Swedes. Or the Norwegians, who are way richer than the Danes. Danes were also happier than them. So what was this ingredient? And many of these books say that what is uniquely Danish, what makes Danes so happy, they came up with hygge as the magic bullet. Hygge. So the logic is, of course, Danes are the happiest people in the world. Then you ask, what is uniquely Danish? You come up with the answer hygge. Ergo, hygge makes you happy. Many of the books have that idea. And I think that that is a fundamental misconception. Danes are not happy because they have hygge. Danes are happy because they have built a society where hygge is a possibility. People in Denmark and in Scandinavia in general, they have fewer financial worries than people say in the United States. People in Denmark have shorter work weeks, and there are policies in place that support families and give families more free time and time together. You could mention maternity leave, which is 12 months in Denmark, that you could divide between the parents. You could also say that there are 6 weeks of vacation for everybody, and a lot of it mandatory in the summer, where most of Denmark and the industry is shut down so that people can vacation together. So that's just two of the many policies put in place to support families and support free time. So Danes simply have more time to socialize with friends and family. And financial security, free time, strong social relations, and like general contentment, that makes you happy. And I think that's what you see in all of those surveys. The next thing that takes the wind out of the sails a little bit for Hygge as the magic bullet for happiness is that Denmark is no longer the happiest place on earth, right? We're still in the top 5, but not the happiest one. Now the Norwegians and the Finns are fighting about who is the happiest. And if you look on a more broad scale, you see that all the countries in the top 10 have strong welfare systems, removing existential financial threats to families. But even more importantly, in the sociological studies that have come out in the last maybe 5-10 years, it has become clear that the most important reason for why the Scandinavian countries come out on top of the World Happiness Index every year is that Danes and Scandinavians, but Danes have low expectations for life. Scandinavians have much lower expectation for their lives than other people. So for a Dane, for me, if my life doesn't turn out quite as badly as I thought it might, then I'm happy. And then I'll try and do it all again tomorrow, right? A fundamental un-American idea, right? Low expectations. Even in one of the focus groups that I read, a Danish person said the following, quote, "A good life in Denmark is a life lived in conformity." I mean, have you ever heard anything as un-American as that? A good life is a life lived in conformity. So, as a Dane in America, over the last years, it's been inevitable that you're going to be asked about Hygge and talk a lot about Hygge. I've even been interviewed a few times, and it is great fun. What I just put on the screen now is an interview with my colleague who teaches Danish culture and language at University of British Columbia in Vancouver. So it is actually my closest Danish colleague. And the interview follows the same pattern as many others do. How do you pronounce Hygge? How do you define? Where do you see it in Danish life? And how can Americans or Canadians get more of it in their lives? But then at the end of the article, it shifts focus from talking about people and interactions to talk about things you need to buy to get more Hygge. And there you see it. So let's go through this. On top there, you see that candles apparently are crucial for creating Hygge in your home. Candles and blankets. And what they suggest you do is that you should go to IKEA and you should spend some money there. And if you buy some things, then you might be able to get more Hygge in your life and you will be happier. So, okay, that's fine. Maybe you can use like the $70 that they suggest. But then if you go to number 2, furniture. So if you really want to be comfortable and experience Hygge in your life, you should buy a Danish mid-century modern chair for $11,000 and sit in front of your Wiener and Holst Pedersen table costing $5,000. So if you really want the happiness, you should spend $16,000, right? And of course, then you should invest in some Danish pastries. It's interesting that we don't even call them Danishes in Denmark. We call them Vienna bread, but that's a whole different story for a different topic. But you should buy mail order pastries from a bakery in California and have them shipped across the country. If I've ever heard anything as unappetizing as mail order pastries, I don't even, like, the Danishes in this country are sucky enough as it is. I don't even know how that's gonna go. So there you have it, right? Buy some candles and some blankies, spend some money, spend $16,000 on furniture, and buy bad pastries online and have them shipped to you. There we go. So it become clear, of course, that the goal of the article is twofold. Not only does the article enlighten its readers about the concept of hygge, but it is also a marketing scheme. The article is a commercial, not only for Denmark and Hygge, but also for IKEA, companies that sell Danish mid-century modern furniture, and mail-order pastries. And these companies no doubt financially subsidize these articles. It plays into the hype about Scandinavia and Denmark, and that's of course good for me and for Scandinavia in general. And the interest in hygge can come off as somewhat disingenuous when it's about spending money. And especially when you consider that hygge in Denmark is the opposite of that. It is the opposite of buying expensive things and buying many things. In Denmark, people are obsessed with being considered middle class. Not only equality and egalitarianism, but even sameness. Sameness is celebrated, and hygge is sometimes used as a form of social control. You don't need a fancy home or to go on extravagant vacations to be happy. Spending time with family and friends in a summer cabin, say, that is hygge. It is just as good, if not better, than what rich people would do. It's even suggested that if you are too wealthy, the hygge could disappear from your life, right? In Denmark, both happiness and money is considered zero-sum games. If some people have a lot, that means that someone has too little. And that's when hygge becomes a means to social control. The rich people with their marble floors and fancy furniture, that's not hyggeligt. Over here in our corner, in grandma's old couch, that's all you need to be happy. We don't need luxury. Money can't buy you hygge. And then sometimes it gets just plain ridiculous. Okay, so I'm gonna try and see if I can show you this commercial. You might have seen it on television. It played a lot last year. So let's see how it goes. Let me just check the sound here. Okay, let's try it.
It's the warm, cozy feeling of spending time with your family. You know it's not hygge? Someone trying to break into your home. Fortunately, his family has Simply Safe home security. They can see what's happening outside with our new doorbell camera. Oh look, it's just Sven. He has more logs for the fire. Protect your home. Protect your hygge with Simply Safe. And with our special holiday price, it's even easier. Let the hygge begin.
I am not sure how well that went on your screens, but hopefully you could hear what they were talking about. And of course you see some tropes about Scandinavian people and how they dress in a cabin, and there's logs on the fire, and then they have this home security system, right? And of course they're right? Having your home broken into is not particularly hyggeligt. But I hope that we can agree that it is a very, very low bar, right? Well, I mean, does that mean that you can claim the opposite and still make sense? Like, is everything hygge if your house is not being burglarized? I mean, of course not, right? Of course not. So of course this plays into the Scandinavian trope, and it is hygge as a marketing scheme. But there's another interesting thing to mention here. Americans, they love rankings, and of course a ranking of America's most hygge cities came out last year. And I'm not sure if you know, but I'm happy to inform you that I live in the most hygge city in America. Seattle is the hyggeligste city in America. Oh, there we go. There's there you have the top 10. So Seattle and Portland, Minneapolis, Salt Lake City, Denver, Rochester, that's around you guys, Hartford, Boston, Cleveland, and Milwaukee. Some of you might be sitting there and thinking now, well, hold on, Kristian. How do you even measure that, right? How do you quantify Hygge? And I had that same thought. So I looked into the metrics and I was not impressed. They measured on 4 different metrics. The first one they call cozy weather. And you simply count the number of overcast days per year, average temperature, and rainfall. And the more rain, the higher the score. And of course, one thing Seattle is known for is having a lot of rain. So there they score on top. The next metric that they looked at to figure out which city was the most hygge in the world, in the United States, was the number of fireplaces per household. Okay. The third one was the number of coffee shops and brew pubs per inhabitant. Okay. And metric number 4 was what they call fun activities. That include how many people say that they play board games or play cards, how many say that they read books, how many cook on the regular, and last but not least, they looked at the average number of knitters per city. Okay, so on these 4 metrics, Seattle is the hyggeligste city in America. Tillykke to me, congratulations to me and to Seattle. But to a Dane, these metrics seem at best arbitrary, and they demonstrate a superficial understanding of hygge, a materialistic understanding of hygge. And I think there might be one other important reason why hygge has become a worldwide phenomenon in the last 4 or 5 years. And to understand that a little better, we need to take a little bit of a detour. Okay, so let me paint a picture for you here. So you are in the most hygge situation imaginable. You're in a cabin with your best friends or family. There's a stew on the stove cooking. Everything smells nice, you know. There's a fire going in the fireplace. People are laughing and talking to each other and having a great time. Maybe you have a glass of wine in your hand or warm beverage. The dog is stretching by the fireplace. The children are playing and getting along. What could make this situation even more hyggelig? What could make this situation even more hyggelig? The answer here is a raging storm outside, right? Everything is enhanced when you're on the inside and there's a raging storm outside. So the word hygge entered the Danish vocabulary in the decades after the devastating loss in the War of 1864. Denmark lost 1/3 of its landmass to Prussia, and this was a massive blow to the Danish confidence. And Denmark really had to come to terms with the fact that the days as a powerful European country was over. This prompted a need for national self-reflection and fostered the idea of what's been lost on the outside must be gained on the inside. The Danes came together, bounded by trauma. Danish democracy grew stronger. The seeds of the welfare state were planted. Danes created one of the best school systems in the world. Cooperatives shut up everywhere. And the idea of taking pleasure in simple things took hold. Hygge. But hygge back then was not only seen as a positive. What you have here is a Danish text. It's a Danish poem that was later had a melody by the famous Danish composer Carl Nielsen. It's written by Jeppe Aakjær, a famous Danish poet, and it's called Som dybest brønd giver altid klarest vand, which translated means something with the deepest well always gives the clearest water. And it is a poem about history and how if you are connected to your roots, then you will have a much clearer understanding of who you are and connection to your nation, to your nationality. But if you see out there in the third stanza, it is mentioned there, though the topic of the day, hygge, in red. I marked it in red. And the two lines there read, Du puslingeland som hygger dig i smug, mens hele verden brænder om din vugge. So that translates to, you teeny tiny country who's having a hygge time while the whole world burns around your cradle. You teeny tiny country having a hygge time while the whole world burns around your cradle. That seems harsh, right? That's a criticism of what hygge is. So we have to look at the context. What is he saying here, the author? And if we look out to the left again and up next to the author's name, we see that the year that this was written was 1916. And that gives us a clue, because 1916 was in the middle of the First World War. And Denmark tried really, really hard to stay neutral, as we had to stay out of wars after the devastating loss in 1864, and trade with both sides and just get through the war without picking sides. And Jeppe Aakjær believed that that was wrong. So he's using hygge here as a negative word of turning your back to the world that is burning around your cradle, right? He's infantilizing the Danes who take pleasure in these simple things and turn their back to the First World War without taking a stand. So in Denmark, the concept of hygge was forged in very difficult circumstances. And it has been argued that the reason that hygge became popular in the UK and here in the USA over the last years is not a coincidence. Here we obviously have a cartoon about Brexit in the UK. So the first Brexit referendum in 2016 was a reaction to globalization, to multiculturalism, to what was seen as a complex and dangerous world. It was a turn inwards, away from the difficult issues at the time. This was also the time hygge became popular. And it has been argued that some of the same factors were at play here in the United States. The idea of America first, that's been seen in various versions around the world, in Denmark too. The idea that the United States need to take care of their own first and turn away from the world, or take a break from the news because they're too overwhelming, is a common part of political discourse now. It is in that environment that hygge became popular here in the United States, and that makes perfect sense. So, if hygge is not the magic bullet to happiness, or not a marketing scheme, not the average number of fireplaces and brew pubs, but instead a concept with a long and complicated history that has had many different meanings through the years, what is it now? My favorite definition of hygge goes like this. To be in a situation characterized by hygge is to be in a state of pleasant well-being and security, with relaxed frame of mind, and in open enjoyment of the immediate situation in all its small pleasures. Key words here are pleasant well-being, security, relaxed frame of mind, open enjoyment of the immediate, and small pleasures. But when I lived in Denmark, I organized camps for international students who came on exchanges in Denmark. I taught them about Danish culture, and sometimes I kept reading their travel blogs after they left my school. And sometimes the students wrote about their experience with Hygge. And here I have one. This is from a Spanish-speaking student who wrote about Hygge. An 18-year-old student from South America tries to explain what Hygge is. And here it is. And that is Hygge, which in Danish means, I don't know, something like feeling good, drinking, and spending 6 or 7 hours sitting around a table and eating and drinking with subdued light in a nicely warm room, and it's cold outside, and one has to return by bike. It's crazy, right? I think that that is such a wonderful quote, and it is just as good as the professional one from one of the books who've spent years thinking about this. To me, it captures the same things. In one of the reports I read, a family was interviewed, and they were asked, is there something that can't be Hygge? Something that can't be Hygge? And the 16-year-old daughter said, yes, sushi. Huh. And then she went on to explain that sushi was too modern, too foreign, too clean-cut to be Hygge. And then after a little while, she corrected herself, telling a story where her and her best friends had bought some takeaway sushi, and they sat outside on some stairs and watched the sunset and ate sushi. And that was actually really hyggelig, she said, right? So then, of course, the question becomes, can anything be Hygge? And I think the best way to go about defining Hygge is to define it negatively. What are the things that cannot be present if a situation is to be called Hygge? It can't be Hygge if there's genuine controversy, right? If people are really arguing deeply, then it doesn't work. Or if you're too public, you have to be somewhat secluded, right? Or if people are busy or like checking their phone, or they have to be somewhere, then it doesn't work. People are not in the now, right? But they're more interested in taking selfies and sharing their Hygge moment online. That takes it away. And if people are not relaxed, or if the situation has no familiarity to it, it needs to be cozy and familiar. But what I truly believe is at the core of Hygge is people. It's people and conversation. I remember when I was 9, 10 years old, my parents would invite friends over to play cards on Saturday nights. And sometimes they would never get to their actual card playing because they would get into long political discussions. And I would sit at the table quietly, rooting for my parents to win the argument, right? And then when the night was over, they would get up and hug and say, oh my God, this was so hyggelig. See you next week, right? They enjoyed each other's company and the discussions, even though it was challenging topics. They knew that they were safe and that all their arguments would be heard in good faith and treated with kindness, even though the counterpart would disagree. This, I think, is at the core of Hygge. Hygge books often claim that you can only talk about mundane topics in Hygge situations, things that doesn't really matter. And I don't think that that's true. I think that if you are in a hyggelig situation, then you feel safe enough to be completely honest. Because you know that even if the other people disagree with you, you know that they will treat you with respect because they love you. They will treat your vulnerability with respect. Many of us has probably forgotten it now, but the way we see the world and the values that we hold, they came from somewhere, right? In Denmark, Hygge plays a big role in this, in my mind, especially for young people. They discuss big and small issues. They get inspired by each other. They mirror each other's views of the world. A friend or a person you look up to says something and you think, I want to think like that too, or I see myself in that value that you portray. So I believe that Hygge is this. I believe that Hygge is a way to practice empathy, to practice trust, to train your tolerance for ambiguity, to strengthen your social relations. That is what really is the core of Hygge. And if you look at it that way, if every single one of us actually made the time and found the energy to practice empathy, to listen to other people who think differently than us, to genuinely trust other people, and through that strengthen our relations and our relationships, then I actually do believe that Hygge can make you happier and ultimately the world a better place. That was it. Thank you very much.